Hey, welcome to the Gospel and Race podcast, where we aim to have the critical conversations about race and the church. I'm your host, Greg Armstrong, and I'm so glad you decided to join us today. Hey, we're about to jump into a conversation that is vital to the church. So I want you to sit back, take a listen, and we'll see you on the other side. Gospel and Race podcast, we back. We're doing this, man. I'm excited about today. I'm excited about all that God is doing in this space. If you don't know, we are here to talk about the critical conversations concerning race and the church. Listen, the church, man, the church cannot stray away from race conversations, especially right now in this year of the Lord, 2025, where all kind of racial antagonisms, tensions, issues. I truly believe, family, that the church needs to be at the forefront of these conversations, and I'm excited about what God is doing. So, I'm hyped today. I got my man in the house. Brian Dye is here, and I just want y'all to shout him out and say, "What's up, Brian? It's good to have you, man."
It's good to be here.
Thanks how you been?
I've been well.
I guess I should read your deal, but I'm gonna let you tell us about you while I get my phone. Tell us about what you have going on, who you are, and just a little bit about your family. What's going on?
Yeah. Man, native of Chicago, in the city of Chicago.
That's a dig on me, by the way.
No.
Because we suburbs.
Not at all. But, man, in 2007, started a conference called the Legacy Conference that targets young adult urban Christians who want to grow as disciple makers. And so we would have about 2,000 young adults coming from around the country to gather here in Chicago for a 3-day conference. Pandemic hit. It gave us a season to kind of reimagine, to make a pivot. And so we started dreaming through how do we accomplish the same mission, equipping what we consider to be everyday Christians to be disciples who make disciples. Yeah. So the janitor, the teacher, the lawyer, so forth. So we created programs that churches could take and minister into their communities outside the walls. Yeah. So from a social emotional learning program called Thriving Minds that goes into elementary schools, to walking with churches, training them how to mentor unchurched students in their community, brotherhood and sisterhood, to a summer employment program called Hood Heroes, where we're employing 175 teens from Chicago's west and south sides this summer. Yeah. To housing, J29 homes, getting abandoned buildings, rehabbing them, selling them to families from the community below market value. You doing all this? So but again, the whole idea is, man, how do we help the church get outside the walls, right? Yeah. To love on people in a holistic way, with the gospel that Jesus brought, in his own flesh.
That's right. So when do you sleep, bro?
Man, I sleep, I get my 7 or so hours of sleep every night. But I have a wife of almost 25 years. It'll be 25 years this summer. Heidi, she is amazing. Yeah. And she is in it with me. Yeah. So no biological kids. Yep. But we've always had an open house. So right now we got three guys living with us. Mm-hmm. And we've had people looking for discipleship, to people homeless in between housing, to people fighting drug addictions. Yeah. And we just try to be a safe place in the community for them to be loved and cared for.
That's good, man. Well, I mean, you've been doing the work, bro. You've been doing that on-the-ground work of discipleship that I feel like the church has lost its way in, because you do very close-knit. You got brothers living with you, right? You're walking this out with people. And I want to hear from you, what is your bare bones definition of discipleship? Yeah. For everybody listening.
Yeah. It's Jesus, kind of gave a statement, come and see, right? Which then led into come and follow. And in Mark 3, he spent the whole night in prayer, right? And he had hundreds of people kind of following him, and he wanted to select 12. So he spent the whole night praying, and he selects 12 and calls them to be with him, so that he might send them out.
Yeah.
Right. So that be with me principle is key. Right. We could listen to a podcast. Podcasts have their place, right? Yeah. A Sunday sermon has its place, but there's nothing that can replace life on life, touch, right?
Yeah.
Your children. Yeah. You don't send them to an orphanage to be raised. Mm-hmm. Even an orphanage could provide them their basic necessities: food, clothing, shelter.
Yep.
They need mom and dad, right? They need the hug. They need when they're crying, right? Mm-hmm. When they fall and scrape their knee. They need the model to look up to, and to see what it looks like to be a man, what it looks like to be a woman that loves God. Yeah. And so we gotta get beyond just the programs into the person, right? Mm-hmm. Into the life and life, Jesus becoming flesh, dwelling among us, tabernacling.
It makes sense to me.
I went to Chicago Public Schools, so
shout out CPS. I went to Elmhurst Private School.
Oh yeah.
I went to Christian Reformed Private School. Come on, Garrett.
So you know the right words.
I wouldn't say that. Well, the thing that people don't say about private school is city folks send kids to private school to think they're going to get right. Mm-hmm. And they look just like city school. Yeah. I'll just be honest with you. But let me ask you this, man, because you mentioned like legacy as a movement, your ministry as a movement. You mentioned a few times the word urban, right? So in the urban space, I want to contend something to you. I want to contend that the suburbs are the new urban. What do you say to that?
So there are urban. Let's define urban first of all. My friend Dahadi Lewis, who's a pastor in Atlanta, defines it by density and diversity, right? Yeah. And so wherever you find a dense population, where people have to rub up shoulder to shoulder, right? And wherever you see diversity, that's kind of defines what urban is, right? So in the suburban context, you have urban, suburban areas, I would say, right? And you have non-urban, suburban areas. But yeah, I mean, the world is becoming more and more urban, right? Yeah. Every decade it's going that way, and at the end of the day, urban feeds the rest. I mean, what happens in the city will eventually trickle to the suburbs, eventually trickle into the rural area, right? Yeah. Because it's the urban areas where the business is, it's where media comes out of, right? Yeah. So culture flows from the urban.
So that's kind of what I want to argue. Like I think a lot of times we say urban equals city, right? But how Dahadi said it, how Dahadi defines it, urban equals density and diversity in a sense, right? So we can, when people have these conversations, they're like, well, this is just for urban spaces, not non-urban spaces. And what they're saying, in a lot of times here in our city is, urban is the city, suburbs is the suburbs. But that's why I want to argue that, because a part of the work that we're trying to lean into is sort of this cooperation with, I hate to say it that way, but more of a cooperation with like the gentrified spaces of the city that then people have been pushed out to the suburbs, right? So now we have all these pockets of urbanization happening in the city. I remember sitting with a lady at coffee. This was maybe 3 years ago, and I asked her, I said, do you notice all the change that's happening around you? Like, do you notice like all the different colors and she had been here for 35, 40 years. And she's like, no, I didn't know anything was happening. Well, me coming in, we saw that there was change in Westmont, in Lombard, in Villa Park. And there is a shifting of cultures, right? And there's an emergence of those here in the suburbs who then I believe we can call urban. and not like have that chasm between, city urban versus suburb, which is kind of middle upper class. The other thing I want to say too, man, is and I want to ask you about this because this is actually kind of fun. If somebody says they're from Chicago, do you respect if like Chicago's what? Do you respect if Chicago is Westmont?
Westmont is not Chicago.
Stop it, Brian.
You can say you're from the Chicago area. You could say you're from Chicagoland.
That's what's up.
That's
good. That's good.
Chicago is 77 neighborhoods. Has distinct borders.
Yeah.
But you are from Chicago.
I'm from
right?
Chicago. Yeah. I don't live in Chicago.
Yeah, but you abandoned the city.
Because there's work to be done out here, bro. That's what I'm saying. What are we gonna do with all these pockets of people that are just looking like fish out of water in the suburbs?
I'm not hating. My context, I really feel called to the city.
That's what I love, bro.
And even more so because, like you said, even the city context is. You have very wealthy areas, right?
Yep.
And you have very impoverished areas.
Yeah.
And I specifically feel called because it's where I grew up. In more impoverished communities, and seeking the shalom of that community.
Yeah. And don't you think it's real dope, man? Like we could partner together in sort of witnessing an ecclesiology in the city urban context, more impoverished spaces that our people need to see, right? Mm-hmm. We probably assume that that's happening. But then also, I would love for folks in the city to come to the suburbs to witness not as easily visible, but the pains and the heartaches of a community and some of the antagonisms, the racisms, the impoverished nature of people. You know what I mean? It's here. It's not as easily visible, but I think that's what's beautiful about the city we're in.
Yeah, and I would even touch on that. A lot of times we think of the inner city, the impoverished communities as lacking,
right.
And the wealthier communities have something to offer, but really there's something to offer on both sides.
That's right, bro. That's right.
What you would always find amongst the poor is this interconnectedness, right?
Yes.
You lean into your neighbors, you depend upon them, right?
Yeah.
I might have some eggs, but I'm missing flour, right?
That's right.
So I go to my neighbor's house and I ask for some flour, and maybe we'll change some eggs, so forth. And you have this dependence upon one, healthy interdependence, right?
Yeah.
Where we're one, That's
right.
My wife and I, when we moved into our current neighborhood 20 years ago, within the first 6 months, we had a bullet go through our bedroom. And we called our neighbors, not Christians. But they had become friends. And they came over in the middle of the night and sat with us. And so you have that beauty where, again, you're in close proximity with each other. You're hearing your neighbors when they're cussing each other out,
all day.
You're in each other's business, you know what's happening. And so there's a beauty in that, right? And I think there's something to why Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor," right? Because there's this dependence, right? When you're wealthy, right? It's I don't really need other people, right? I go do my job. I come home. I park my car in the garage. I enter through the garage door into the house, right? I don't see nobody. I don't need to see anybody, right? Because I don't need them. And so there's beauty to be seen in both spaces, right? And so how do we, in a world that's become more and more divided politically, economically, racially, so forth, how do we help bring people together, create tables instead of tribes? Right?
I appreciate that, and I would also argue that Christ is found in the impoverished spaces. Blessed are the poor. That Christ is found at the bottom. That there's a different sense of connectivity in those spaces because there isn't a reliance on one another. But in the Christian space, there's a reliance. It's a heavy reliance on Christ. You know what I mean? Not that in wealthier spaces there isn't a reliance, but there is such a posture of
Yeah, you got to fight for it harder. I
Yeah.
mean, Jesus said, it's easier for the camel to go through the eye of a
Yeah,
needle,
yeah,
right, than
like
a
a
rich
rich
person
man.
enter in the kingdom of God,
Yeah.
right? He's not saying it's impossible. He's not saying wealthy people are evil or anything
Yeah.
like that, right? But again, my wealth can trick my mind into thinking that I'm my own God. I'm my own provider, right? As opposed to like really knowing dependence,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so as a wealthier person, right, what does it look like to live simply, to give wealth away, right? So that I train my mind how to not be dependent upon what's sitting in my bank account, right?
Yeah, yeah. Dude, I want to talk more about discipleship. I know that's your sweet spot. And I've never done what you do. Which is I'm going to life on life disciple people to the point where you're going to live with me, we're going to walk together, we're going to live, you know what I mean? Like I've always been in the church space, church staff. This has kind of been my world, facilitating community worship, discipleship. Our church this year, we decided to cut out as many bells and whistles as we could and focus intently on like discipleship, right? Which is why I need to really lean into you in this season. And my question for you is this: where's the church missing it on disciple making? We have to be missing it. And I don't want to paint a disparaging picture of the church. You and I had an off camera conversation about attractional church and mega church and disciple making, and I love what you said about there's space for all of it. Where's the state of the church as it relates to disciple making? When I say the church, not what you're doing, but what you see, congregations across our city and beyond.
Yeah. So even those two words, discipleship versus disciple making, I think words matter, right? When I think of discipleship, right, I mean, just think of like what we tend to make it is, let me teach you how to study the Bible. Let me teach you how to stop looking at porn. Let me, so forth. It's very much focused on the individual, and that's where the buck stops, right? I almost think of like a discipleship, right? Like we're creating this cruise ship where, hey, we're all happy together, we're loving each other, so forth, but it's really about us, right? Disciple making, the idea of making a disciple, right, means work has to be done. It means that we've been saved for a purpose, right? And so if I'm discipling somebody, the goal is always that person begins discipling somebody else, and that person disciples somebody else, right? And that's all of our spiritual lineage goes back to basically 12 disciples, right? Who pass on to somebody else, who pass on to somebody else, who pass on to somebody else. And so as I disciple people, pour into them, that's clearly being communicated over and over again. Hey, who have you shared the gospel with recently? Who are you walking with? Who has God laid on your heart to begin meeting with regularly? Because again, it's the work of making a disciple. And when we look at Jesus, like literally he spent 3 years focused on 12 individuals, right? They followed him everywhere he went. They heard his teachings. They saw his miracles, so forth. But 3 years and not 1 hour a week, meeting at Starbucks,
No shade to the Starbucks disciples.
No shade. Yeah. I mean, I typically, so guys I'm discipling, I meet with them for coffee once a week for an hour and a half, 2 hours, right?
Sure.
So I understand, but I call that the formal aspect of disciple making, right?
Yeah.
But then there's the informal, when I'm recording a podcast, hey, Omar, meet me here. Yeah. So he's listening into the podcast. We're having a conversation before about his marriage. We're talking afterwards, so forth. Yeah. And so it's got to be the formal and the informal.
Okay, I appreciate the informal. Because I think, well, let me go back. You said discipleship like a cruise ship. Are you saying that's more insular, like churches kind of use discipleship programs? We're gonna work you into kind of what our system looks like here. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Discipleship is usually like a 6-week course, 8-week course, right?
Right.
Giving you the basics. But that's really where it stops for the most part, right? But it's how do I I want to equip you in the faith, right? I want you knowing how to study the Bible, how to pray, how to grow in holiness, how to confess sin, so forth, right? That does not say that's not important, but after that, or in the midst of that, it's okay. Who are you passing this on to? Someone gave me this illustration years ago that's always stuck with me. In Israel, if you've ever been to Israel, there's 2 main bodies of water. To the north, there's the Sea of Galilee. To the south, there's the Dead Sea. The one river flows through both, the Jordan River. So Jordan River flows into the Sea of Galilee, flows out of the Sea of Galilee, right? Flows into the Dead Sea. Sea of Galilee is full of life. Dead Sea is full of death. Right? What is the difference? It's the same water flowing into both of them. Well, the difference is there's an outflow from the Sea of Galilee. There's no outflow from the Dead Sea. And so the minerals that are meant to bring life end up overwhelming the system where now it brings death, you know? And so in the same way, he who's faithful with a little will be entrusted with more.
That's
right.
Knowledge
puffs up. We see these scriptures that warn us. If you get too much knowledge and you don't have an output for it, it's only going to puff you up. It's only going to make you arrogant, proud, a person who wants to argue with other people, so forth, right? You start to think, oh, I got it all figured out. They don't, right? So let's battle with each other over theology or whatever, right? It's in the same way. When we eat, we could eat healthy. We could eat the right foods, but if we don't ever get up and walk,
right.
If we don't ever have an outlet, play basketball somewhere where we're burning the calories, we're gonna get fat, right? And
I'm a testament to that, church. I just want to say, I'm just trying to cut off that. This is wonderful.
We need the input and the output.
Yeah, that's it, bro. That's it. And that's so good, man. Like. Man, that's so good. So that versus disciple making is the pudding. I am expending out. I am pouring into someone else, and
for an investment.
For an investment,
that you're going to pay it forward, right?
Right.
That's Paul's idea of entrust to faithful people who could pass it on to others, right? 2 Timothy 2:2.
So, but we got to talk about this, Brian, because people that pass through our church come from spaces that are simply like attractional in nature, right? Boom, bam, music's hot, preaching's hot, kids ministry's hot, everything's hot. And then we go home, come back, do the same thing. We've experienced that, at least in sort of the modern Western church over the last 20, 30 years with the rise of the attractional creative spaces, churches, et cetera. And then we do have discipleship programs in these places, right? Like how to get your marriage on track, how to get your money right, all that kind of stuff. And I feel like we're trying to drag ourselves out of that, maybe. I don't know. But I feel that there's a distaste for that now. A lot of people that come through our church are wounded by spaces that disregarded them as humanity and then in turn said, hey, come for the show versus let me walk with you. So I say all that to say in some spaces, people have lost an appetite to be discipled.
Yeah.
I don't got time for that. I can't, I don't got time to meet you there. I don't have time to show up. I don't really have time to meet you for coffee because I got this. But I'll see you at church Sunday. Yeah. How do we foster an appetite for people to want to be discipled? And that's what we want to do at our church. Like we want to figure out, how do we make you hungry to be discipled, to sacrifice your time, to learn of the scripture, to learn of life so that I can pour into you? Is there a way to do that?
Yeah. So one, I would say, specifically when we talk about younger generations, each generation is going to become more and more desirous of intimate relationship because, again, if it's all about attraction, someone could find a better preacher than you
all day.
And
Yes.
someone could find a better worship team
Yep.
than yours all day.
Yep.
So why do I need to come to your church on a Sunday morning when I can lay in bed and have my own church?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The only draw is the community. And so what the phone can't give somebody, what YouTube can't give somebody, is that personal touch.
Yeah.
So the younger generations are more connected but disconnected than ever before, right? So you have 5,000 Facebook friends, but how many people do you really know?
Actually know.
Right? And so on social media, I got to put up this front. It seems like everyone else is happy.
Yeah.
I know I'm not happy. So it leads to depression. I'm also more aware of what's going on in the world than ever before. When I was growing up, I had to watch the news. I had to read a newspaper if I want to know what's going on in Israel or Ukraine or wherever, right? And so you have people who are disconnected and yet overwhelmed with the brokenness of this world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what did the early church provide? The early church provided community, intimate community, right? Where you were in each other's homes day by day, breaking bread, right?
Yep.
And they offered mission, purpose, right? Hey, let's be out there. There's someone amongst our midst who is in need. Let's sell our possessions and give to that person.
Yeah, let's take care of them.
Right?
Yep.
Let's take care of them.
Yep.
Let's the city, down the road doesn't have any churches, doesn't have any Christians. Let's go and preach the gospel to them, right?
Yeah.
So the mission and the purpose are two things that the American church, by and large, have left out of the equation for several decades, if not more, right? And that worked okay, I guess, for a season. But I think what God's doing is He's bringing us back to the heart of the church.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's be a family, an ecclesia, a community that are interconnected, dependent upon each other, serve one each other, love each other, and is on mission in the world, because that's the reason why God still has us here, right?
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying, especially with younger people, I've never met anybody who doesn't want to be discipled, who doesn't want mentorship, right? Now, I think we can make it awkward, right? We don't just walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, can I disciple you?" That's like walking up to a girl and be like, "You want to be my wife?"
Like
It's like, no, it's like, "Hey."
Although we did used to holler at the girls a little bit more blatantly back in the day, back in the 90s.
But no, usually it's like, "Hey, you want to go grab coffee? You want to go to the movies? You want to grab dinner? Can
That's
I?"
right. That's right.
And so, same thing. I think when there's people within our churches or our context, our communities, that we want to make an investment into, it's, hey, let's come over to my house for dinner,
Let's spend
time together, right?
Yeah.
And then that naturally grows, right?
That's right.
Maybe later on you have the DTR, the determine the relationship conversation, right? But it's just inviting people to be with you, and that's
all you do in your discipleship.
Yeah.
It's not complicated, right?
No, come see, come hang out with me.
Just come hang with me.
And
like
then,
you don't
and then
hand them a
afterwards,
workbook.
It's okay. Now start following me.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
I know some people use curriculums, content, so forth, and not that that's bad or per se,
Right.
but I personally think we're the best curriculum.
Say that again. We're the best curriculum.
So, man, what is it? People want to know, like, what does it look like for you to walk with Christ?
Right.
In your context, right? To love your wife, to raise your children, to budget your money, to engage with the people at the supermarket, whatever, right? And so, what I do when I meet with people in the formal time that I meet with them weekly is we just study Ephesians together. We just do an inductive study.
That's it.
I don't come prepared. There's no notes.
Yeah.
It's like Paul, an apostle of Christ. Okay, let's talk. Who is Paul?
So
right?
Okay, all right. Yes, yeah. Have we just been overcomplicating this?
I think so.
Bro, I'm thinking about. I've worked in church 20 years, in most of those years full-time vocational ministry, and I can almost feel the hours and hours of meetings we've had about how we disciple people. How are we going to disciple people? How are we going to do this discipleship program? Hey, y'all, I just came across this new discipleship program online. I think we should implement into the church. We run it through the staff, run it through the pastor. We do all this work, and you're pretty much like, hey, I want to meet with you every week, and I want you to watch what I do. Like Paul's like, do as I do. And is that what you're saying? We've overcomplicated.
That's exactly. I like in John 1, verse 29, and then in verse 35, John the Baptist, the mega church pastor of the day, right? Thousands of people coming out of the cities into the rural area to be baptized by him, to hear his teachings, so forth. And yet, John chapter 1, it says John was standing with two of his disciples. And he sees Jesus walking by, and he says, "Behold, the Lamb of God." Right? The idea of a rabbi in that day and age, right, was a disciple maker.
Yeah.
They were someone who would invite people to come and be with them, so that they could become like them, and replicate what they do. Right?
Sure.
And so when a rabbi would teach, they would sit down. This is why in Luke chapter 4. When Jesus reads from the scroll of Isaiah, he sits down and then he starts to teach, right? So the idea that John is standing and not sitting means that he wasn't teaching, yet he's still with his two disciples, right? Yeah. What are they doing if he's not teaching?
Observing.
They're doing life. They're observing, Yeah. And so now when Jesus walks by, Jesus is not missed, right? I think we get so busy, so caught up in the curriculum and the content and the programs and the plans and so forth, that Jesus is walking back and forth, and we don't even see.
Couldn't even show you that's him right there.
No,
that's good, man. Okay, I got to ask you. I got to lean into this. So cross-ethnic discipleship, or how we like to say it here, sort of a multi-ethnic discipleship. One of the things that our church, being a multi-ethnic church, there are so many assumptions that are brought into the room from every culture. Everybody's discipled differently, and they come into when the white people come to our church, the first question they ask is, when are the small groups? Black people come to our church, one of the first questions they ask, when is pastor teaching Bible study? Other cultures come in, they're looking for community of some sort, but that's what we've experienced. Have you experienced sort of cross-ethnic discipleship, and what are some of the road bumps to that?
Yeah. In the education world, educators have what they call an IEP, Individualized Education Plan, right? Where for a good teacher, your job is to know your students and to know how they best learn. And then you adapt the curriculum to their learning style, right? So if little Johnny, he's a verbal processor, then, okay, how do I create a small group for him to discuss his assignment, right? Susie, she learns by doing it, and so how do I give her some worksheets and stuff to do and so forth, right? In the same way, I have what I call IDP, Individualized Discipleship Plan, So what does this person need? How do they get what they need, right? And let me adjust it to them, right? And so I think that's just normal for not just different cultures, because like even in one race, right, there's could be African Americans who like the small groups, and there's others who like the Bible study, right? Right. By pastor. And but it's spending the time, and this is what shepherds do, right? Pastors, right? A shepherd knows his sheep or her sheep, right? We take the time to listen to them, to learn from them, to see where the gaps are, right? To see how the learning style is, and we adapt it to that. And so as either whether it's a pastor of a church or whether it's just an individual Christian who's trying to grow and discipling other people, I think this is critical, right? For us to figure out. And as a church, it's probably best to have multiple options, right?
And that's kind of where I want to land, because I think about let's say a white group leader or a white pastor who's pastoring or leading some young black guys from the urban city space, and there's some different antagonisms that that come along with being a young black man in Chicago and certain spaces in Chicago. And so like you're coming to this leader talking about some of the racial disparities and some of the things that you're facing. I went into the job, and because my name was Saquon, they looked at me funny. You know what I mean? Like these little things that burden persons of color. Like, I think what we run into is we try to blanket discipleship. You're not doing this. I'm just saying, like, generally in the church wants to blanket discipleship, just kind of rub the blood of Jesus over it and say, hey man, just follow me as I follow Christ, and let's go to Scripture, which is good. But then there are also these cultural indicators that I think a deeper discipleship is needed for, right? So I was triggered by that thought when you said we need multiple people. This is why I advocate for the multi-ethnic church. Whether it's multi-ethnic in one church or multi-ethnic layers of relationship, where my church is in relationship with it. Who can I call to help with difference? Who can I call to help with my immigrant, my family who has immigrant neighbors or immigrant family members? And the Sunday school lesson this week did not help them as they are fearing for their life. You're right. So like, how can we better diversify? You know what I mean? How can we better diversify our discipleship endeavors? And I'll give one thought, and then I would love for you to just riff on this. We got some brothers here, like we got some brothers at our church, right? They don't live in the suburbs, and there's some complexities that they deal with that maybe I can't even walk them through. I can walk them through Scripture. Yeah. But I might have to say, hey, man, I want you to call Brian. Let's see what capacity he has. Because I think he's actually walked with brothers like you in the inner city who understand. Do you have any riff on that?
So sometimes the downside to disciple-making relationships is that you could kind of get this feel that there's like an ownership. Like I'm your pappy and you're my son, and
there is some of that sonship language and father. And I'm not bragging, but it's in there.
Yeah, and we need to be cautious of that, because ultimately, the Holy Spirit is our best disciple maker. Right? He's the one who will always be with us, never leave us. So forth. And so it's as someone who's taking primary ownership of discipling somebody, in my mind, I'm always thinking through, okay, who else do they need to get connected with?
There you go. Yeah, that's good.
Because Luke 6:40 says a student who is fully trained will be like his teacher, right? Yeah. That could be good, and it could be bad. Right?
There you go.
Because there's areas that I'm not as good with. I'm not good with budgeting, and I've never put together a budget, even though I know the importance of it intellectually and so forth. I grew up on food stamps. Like we ain't have nothing. And so as soon as I now it's like, man, I just, if I want a cup of coffee, I'm going to go get a cup of coffee, type thing. Right. And so I know that, hey, you should talk with this person about budgeting, right? Meet up with them, connect with them, so forth. Yeah. I have another guy who's like wants to go to seminary. I'm like, I've never been in seminary. That's just not me, right? Yeah. So, I'll give you my 2 cents on it, but hey, meet up with this guy who's been in seminary, who's been down that field, down that route. And so it's really, disciple making should even be communal.
There you go. I like that. Yeah.
Where again, I think it's important for someone to take, because if no one takes ownership, then no one takes ownership, right? Sure. But it's more like a head coach. Yeah. As opposed to the only coach, right? Yeah. So. Yeah.
And then, do you think discipleship I know discipleship is the disciple into the faith in the Christ Jesus, be more Christ-like. But do you see a cross-ethnic discipleship that disciples us into multi-ethnic reconciliation or biblical justice, right? Do you see, like, for instance, I believe that the multi-ethnic church is to lead the charge in against racial disparity. I believe the multi-ethnic church can lead the charge for racial unity and for various reasons that I've talked about on this podcast before. But then a cross-ethnic discipleship, do you think that could work in favor of dismantling racisms that perhaps were not even recognized in an individual? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I know it might not be the movement in a city, perhaps, but can it though?
Yeah. The whole goal of the gospel, right, in which the Jews missed, and I think the American church today missed, right?
Yeah.
Is God's heart was always the nations, right? When he called Abraham, he says, I will bless you so that you could bless the nations.
Yeah.
Abraham didn't do it, right? He goes into Egypt and he tells his wife Sarai to lie about being his sister, so forth. So he actually brings a curse to Egypt as opposed to a blessing. And so, man, how do we see, again, Ephesians 4 talks about the wall of hostility being torn down, right? You have something, a perspective on the world that I don't have, right? My wife has a perspective on the world that I don't have, and vice versa, right? We all, there's a picture you've probably seen, this illustration. There's this elephant, and there's like 6 blind men feeling different parts of the elephant, right?
Yeah.
One's feeling the ears, right, and says, "Oh, it's a fan," and one's feeling the trunk, and it's whatever the case is, right? And your perspective shapes what you think this object is.
What you think it is, right?
None of us are God. None of us are all-knowing. None of us are present everywhere at once.
That's right.
And so my view on the world is limited. And thus, when I read the scriptures, my view on the scriptures is limited. We could both read the story of the Exodus, right?
And have a whole different
take from it, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's from Pharaoh's perspective, whether it's from the Hebrews' perspective, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's from the soldiers' perspective, whether it's from the wizards' perspective. I mean, like whoever, right?
Yeah, whatever.
And so how do we create a table? I love, churches don't do this anymore, but, you used to have potlucks, right?
Yeah.
Down in the church basement. And
That's right.
I grew up, so I'm white and Puerto Rican, but I grew up in an African-American and Puerto Rican community.
Yeah.
And so our church was a small church, but it was a diverse church. And so there would be Puerto Rican rice, there'll be Mexican food, there'll be, tacos, and there'll be, the green bean casserole that, and I mean, it's like, it's all, right?
Yeah.
And that's beautiful when you take the best of all these cultures, right? And we know that's what Revelation, that's the end will be, right? Where people from every nation, tongue, and tribe, singing in their own language, praising God, right?
That's right.
Imagine that harmony that's going to come from that. We're not all singing the same language.
That's right.
We're not all singing Chris Tomlin.
Right. No, we ain't doing that.
Or Fred Hammond, right? It's going to be a mix of it all. So
it might be a little bit more Fred, though.
Maybe, probably.
I don't know, man.
Probably.
Woo! But you're right, bro.
And so, man, how do we learn to create tables where we could learn from each other, hear from each other's perspective? Again, this world will segregate us more and more with social media and how they do the analytics and so forth. What you see and whatnot. Our news. If you watch Fox News or CNBC, right, you're gonna see different news, right, or from a different perspective. And I would say this as a white man, right? Primarily a white man, even though I grew up in a diverse culture context. White Americans aren't used to being in diverse spaces. Or if they are, they're usually in charge, right?
Right.
Minorities, for the most part, are used to being in diverse spaces. You go to work, you have to learn how to code, switch and so forth.
Yep.
You have to learn how to adapt. You learn about country music. You learn about, this and that. You
learn
so
about
forth.
Alternative music like I did growing up. Come on, offspring. You didn't think I knew about that, did you?
That's why I think it's so important for the. Again, it's always who's at the margin of society.
Yeah,
those should be the people that we're learning from. So the poor, the minority, right?
Yeah.
Because again, they have a way of seeing God in a way that the majority culture doesn't, right?
So go back to white people. I don't want to misquote you, but white people are not used to being in diverse spaces. What does a white person feel when they walk into a majority black church like ours?
I think for the most part, this is cool. This is fun. It's almost like going to a basketball game, right?
Yeah. And this is not an indictment. We're not saying like people don't genuinely come into diverse spaces. But just from a perspective of sort of like a white American that comes into a space like ours, which is black led, multi-ethnic. Mm-hmm. I'm curious as to what people are feeling or thinking, especially initially. So this is great. Yeah. This is like cool. It's different.
Yeah.
Music's different.
Yeah. It's I would say for many it'll be a cool experience, right? But then I'm going back home to where I don't have to live in that reality anymore.
Is that a real tension?
I think so. And again, I'm speaking from a different perspective, but again, my nickname growing up was White Boy, because
you were the minority in those spaces.
I was a white person,
Yeah.
And so, but I went to college at a PWI, predominantly white institution, and I was like, what's that music you're listening to? And all this stuff. And now even though I live in a primarily African-American impoverished community, I try to get around, and explore different cultures and people groups.
Sure.
My wife and I, we do one international trip a year. We've been to China a few times. We've been to different countries in Africa. We've been in Mexico and UK and so forth, right? Yeah. Because again, for us, it's about expanding our understanding of the world, how we see things, right? But again, that takes intentionality, for me, as a white man who's married to a white woman, we don't have to be in minority spaces.
How much work is it? And I'm not making you the resident white dude, right? Like, you don't speak for all white people. I understand that. How much work does it take to stay in something like this, where it's like, I love it, but how much is that? How much work is that taking for white people to stay?
I would imagine. So, our country has a pretty rough history, right? To Native Americans and to African Americans and specifically, right?
Yeah.
And even women in general, right? And who were the founders of our country, who have been the people in power, mostly white men.
That's right.
And so it could often come across as like white men are evil, and they just kind of need to be, dealt with in that way, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's the reality, and I don't think that's the reality that anyone wants to get across, right? But that's the way it could feel at times. In the same way with like a police officer, right? Who there's a police shooting, right, of a young person, and now all police feel attacked because there's a protest or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. We have to learn how to like take ourselves out of our skin and listen to the cries, right? Yeah. Listen to the perspective, and admit. I mean, there's so many times in the Old Testament where, like in Nehemiah, they're confessing sins not just of themselves but of their ancestors, right? Yeah. It's not in the same way. Like, it's not saying I did what my ancestors did, but it's saying, hey, there's been effects that have been passed down generation
I either benefit and complicit until I denounce it.
Yeah.
I either benefit or I'm complicit to whatever disparaging act or cultural assumption there is, right? In your particular culture.
Yeah. So I think as a white man, right, I have to, one, posture myself to hear from female voices. I have to posture myself to hear from African American voices, Latino voices, Native voices, right? Korean, right? Chinese. I'm like the more voices I could hear from and learn from, the better I'm gonna be. The better my perspective will be, right? As opposed to, again, this limited view that I could see the world in.
Yeah, and even to know like what's been at play. For instance, I learned about the racist posture between blacks and Latinos at one point. I learned from my Asian brothers and sisters the racisms, the racial capitalism, in the Asian communities, and how that played against black people or against Asians, right? Like there have been all these pockets of tension that I don't think we would actually have, aside from scholarship, aside from reading, et cetera, we wouldn't have these perspectives unless we're at a table, right? Unless we're sitting at a table with someone. Like, and so I'm with you on, you didn't say this, but I'm with you on the table. But I also believe that the table, not the Sunday service, because the Sunday morning multi-ethnic service can almost act as a veneer. If you enjoy the atmosphere, the people, the music, I mean, we can do that. We can do multi-ethnic. But I think multi-ethnic is really determined, or cross-ethnic is really tested and determined by the table. How can I sit at the table, learn, me and Brian learn from one another, me and Brian submit to one another, let our cultural realities be at play so that we can actually repent, submit, or whatever the case may be. And I believe discipleship, with what you're helping us understand, and the table, which may be the same thing to you, I'm not sure. I believe that can be, or may even be, the only answer to dismantling racial oppression, in terms at least getting the church on the forefront of being a voice towards racial. Because my thing is, I can take me in a black church and go march, on Ogden Avenue. But man, if I take me and Brian, Garrett, and my Hispanic bros and my age, if we all, that's a different cry. You know what I mean? Not when it's a veneer, but when it's really, we've sat at the table together, we've cried together, we've broken bread together, we've understood. I get your context better. Don't you see that as discipleship too?
Yeah. And I would add to that, a lot of times, this is a multicultural church podcast, right?
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah.
A lot of times churches can say, hey, we want to grow in cultural diversity and so forth, so let's hire a black worship leader or a Hispanic janitor, or whatever the case is, right?
Yeah.
And it could be done in such a way that becomes tokenism, as opposed to real giving power to people, right?
Yeah.
And so again, we could plan a church together, me and you. We could pastor a church together and never talk, except church business, right? I don't know you, you don't know me, we don't know each other's stories, right? I'm making all the decisions, you just follow through, so forth. It could even appear to be multicultural on a Sunday service, right?
Exactly.
But it not be multicultural at all.
At all.
Because, again, we're not sharing life.
We should do, Brian? So churches who say, well, we want to be multicultural. We should just find the most abstract cultural difference from that person and say, all right, spend a year with this person. And then you become multicultural. Oh, our church wants to be multi-ethnic. We want to understand. Okay, well, I want you three to hang out with those three every week for an hour at Starbucks. You know what I mean? Yeah. And let's take some of what Brian is teaching us, life on life, and using cultural differences. Now you got to learn from them, or especially as it relates to white people in our Western American context. I want you to go sit under that leader. That black leader, that Hispanic leader, that Asian leader, Indian leader. I want you to sit under them for a year and then we'll release you into doing X, Y, and Z. That'll be a different type of discipleship. That'll be a different type of church.
I heard
plan.
someone say years ago, I don't remember who it is, but when you're interested in starting a multicultural church, first examine who's at your table. Who do you share meals with? Because if you're not sharing meals, if you're not doing life with people who are different than you, you're jumping the gun.
That's it, bro. That's it.
Like take that time, take that season to build multi-ethnic relationships.
That's it, bro.
And then out of that, naturally will flow a multicultural church.
That's right. Because it's organic to the nature of your relationships, your humanity, and what God is doing amongst the people. And so I agree with that. Can I plug my 4 levels of multi-ethnic leadership? I hate doing that, but I'm going to plug it, though. 4 levels of multi-ethnic, what is it called? 4 levels of multi-ethnic something for leaders. It's a free ebook on my website, gregarmstrong.org. And I say that, I'm plugging that because I say what you're saying, which is I believe everybody should have multi-ethnic relationships. The fact that this country was founded on brutality, and the fact that this country needs it's reconciling through race, politics, economics, etc. It's got to reconcile through all that. I believe that at some level, whether you have a multi-ethnic church, you may not have that. You may need multi-ethnic friends, multi-ethnic churches with a anyways, I'm messing it all up. Just go read it. Whatever. Just read it. Look, I could talk to this dude all day. I could talk to Brian. Dude, I can rap with you all day because I think this is where the Lord's been leading our heart as a church into discipleship, which you messed me up with that. Not just discipleship, but disciple making. But then also I want to actually lean in a little further, disciple making in multi-ethnic spaces for the purpose of racial reconciliation. And I want to appreciate you, man, and all the work you've been doing. You've been doing this in our city for a minute. And I just want to thank you for just digging in, bro, and not taking the bait and just sticking with it and just saying, hey, we're going to make disciples that make disciples that make disciples. And to watch you give your life to it, to like, hey, I'm just going to make disciples. And I just want to appreciate that and that we see you, bro. And like we're with you and we need you. We need your heart. We need what you have, bro. Yeah. You're encouraging all of us. I want you to know that. I want you to talk before we wrap up. Talk about Legacy Conference. Like what's going on with Legacy Conference? Yeah. When are we doing Legacy Suburbs? You like that? Come on, man. Right here at Renew.
All highways lead to the city. So Legacy Conference, obviously we did them from 2007 to 2020. The pandemic hit. We put them on pause. We just brought them back last year, 2024. We'll be in 4 cities this year. So we're trying to make it more localized. So we'll be in Houston, Chicago, LA, and Miami. 4 different dates, 4 different Saturdays. People can find out information legacydisciple.org. Jackie Hill Perry to Preston Perry to Beth Moore, Tripoli. So it's really trying to bring young adults. 18 and 35 is our target audience. There's a lot of church leadership conferences that are amazing. Ours is not a church leadership conference. Ours is more like, hey, if you don't know your place in the church, if you don't have a leadership role in your church, come to Legacy Conference.
We're gonna help you.
We're gonna help you. Because again, we don't need to wait for a title. We don't need to wait for a church to give us a budget. You know? How do you engage your neighbors? How do you minister at your workplace, right? How do we make disciples where we live, work, and play?
Yeah, that's good, man. Hey, y'all check out Legacy Conference. Hey, give it up for my man Brian Dye, man. Thank you, bro. I really mean that for spending some time with me today.
Thank you.
And love, man, love. This is the Gospel and Race Podcast. We out, y'all. Peace.